Something satisfying happened on Fox News yesterday, and it reveals a strategic approach that Democrats should be studying carefully. Pete Buttigieg went on Fox and did something that most Democratic politicians avoid. He didn't play defense. He didn't try to find common ground. He went directly at the hosts with facts they couldn't refute, and watching the response, watching the inability to counter his points, tells you something important about the current political landscape. Stay with me because what I'm about to show you isn't just entertainment, it's a blueprint for how Democrats can communicate in hostile media environments. Terry, great to have you here. I know that you will be out on the trail. I heard you just had a big rally in a purple area. There were more than 1,000 there. I believe it was in Wisconsin. And in my mind, there's two kind of ideological debates playing out in the Democratic Party, and one is this socialism debate. And we've seen that play out right here in New York City. And we've seen some of the polling trends, including Gallup, 66% of Democrats have a favorable view of socialism. And I'm wondering what your response is to that and how you'll handle it on the trail. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's kind of just become a label and sometimes name-calling, where the real important thing is to figure out what candidates actually stand for. It's not surprising that you're going to have a different kind of Democrat winning in a place like New York City than you might in a place like New Jersey or Virginia or Northern Michigan, where I live, or the other places we're going to be competing. But what I'm finding is that even though we're a big tent and different Democrats sometimes have different answers, we're asking the same question. And I think it's the right question, which is, how do we make life more affordable in this country? You know, this president took office promising that he was going to make life more affordable on day one. He said grocery prices would go down. They've gone up. Energy prices are up while he's killing utility projects that would create more energy generation. Obviously, we're really in a painful place as a country right now on healthcare, where a big issue in the midterms will be, why did so many congressional Republicans vote to cut Medicaid while they were giving tax cuts to some of the wealthiest Americans? And why do they refuse to extend the tax credits that will help with everybody's premiums going up? You know, the House voted to do it. The Senate GOP refuses, and the president, I think, could solve that with one phone call, but he just won't. So these are the kinds of issues that I've been hearing about. Certainly that event you mentioned when I was in Wisconsin, really around the country. And I think they're going to drive the election this year. You know, I think the president's response would likely be that the Biden-era high of inflation was 11%. I brought it down to 2.7%. I have the right solution. There's more work to be done, I imagine, is what he would say. I understand you have a different viewpoint, but you did mention some of these issues playing out, and one of them is the issue of biological men in women's sports, and it's a big issue. In fact, it's one that even Kamala Harris's internal data said moved the electorate by 2.7 percentage points. So where do you come down on that issue, which will no doubt be asked in a presidential debate potentially? Well, I think approaching an issue like that, the most important thing is to take everyone seriously. Take people across the different sides of this issue seriously. Whether you're talking about parents who are wondering what this means for fairness, for their kids competing, or parents who want to make sure that their kids aren't being discriminated against and get a chance to participate. And you know, this is going to be different in different cases, right? Middle school is not the same thing as the Olympics. Chess is not the same thing as weightlifting. Which is why I think these are decisions that are best not made by politicians. But I also have to tell you, I would be surprised if this is a top 3 or even a top 10 voter issue in the midterms this year. I know that millions and millions of dollars came from Republican campaigns to put this issue front and center. They might feel that temptation again, even though I think that effort largely fell flat when they tried to change the subject to this from affordability in the elections in late 2025. But to me, at a time when, again, you got energy bills through the roof, the president has failed to do the things he specifically promised to do, like cut healthcare prices or premiums, or cut grocery prices. And at a time when we have these shocking events in Minnesota, right? When you have American citizens being arrested, being gunned down, something that I think can bring a lot of people together. watching somebody exercising their First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights. I know my party doesn't talk about the Second Amendment as much, but I think seeing an American taken to the ground, having his gun removed, and then after having his gun removed, being shot in the back up to 10 times, and then having the government say that he was a terrorist all along based on no evidence besides the fact that he was a lawful concealed carry holder. I think those are the kinds of things that, as painful as they are, can actually bring together a lot of Americans to say, hey, we need a different direction. Or even if you do usually vote Republican, we need some balance in our government so that you got a Congress that isn't just a rubber stamp that can exercise some oversight over an administration that's gotten out of control. You know, I think two things can be true. One, it's a tragedy anytime an American citizen dies. Absolutely. And we heard Tom Holman this week talk about how he prays every time before he goes out. Doesn't want even, the illegal immigrant who might have a criminal record to be harmed in the process of obtaining them. But at the same time, Americans clearly called for immigration enforcement. Clear's throat, they called for not a lawless southern border where 2 million gotaways happened during the Biden administration. So what's the response to those in your party who are saying abolish ICE? Because that is not where the American people stand. Yeah, I think Americans want and expect that we will have a secure border, understand that we have immigration laws, and that those immigration laws have to be enforced. But what we're seeing is not that. What we're seeing is the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law are breaking the law. It's been held in court that they have violated countless court orders, and the people they're going after are not increasingly and proportionately not just the person we can all agree needs to be deported and dealt with, somebody with a criminal record. But, when you see a 5-year-old kid in a Spider-Man backpack being treated, being incarcerated, this way, when you see people who did follow the rules, follow the laws, did everything they're supposed to, and they are still getting arrested, mistakenly deported, having their rights violated. When you see an American, this photo of an American woman opening the door to her home and on her doorstep finds half a dozen agents, federal agents in tactical gear. That is more tricked out than what I would take outside the wire when I was in Afghanistan. Again, on the door of an American porch, I think most people get that is wrong. It is not making us safer. And the border police should be dealing with the border. I don't know what border is in Minnesota. Yeah. And I would know DHS's response would be, I know what border is in Minnesota. Let me correct myself, but not Minneapolis. I'm sure you do know the borders there. DHS's response would be that they were taking care of that 5-year-old in that moment. They also would say 70% of those who they have obtained have a criminal record. That's their response. I do want to ask you about foreign policy. We've seen Maduro, who is now in custody here in New York City. He will be on trial, and I know initially you were critical of the operation President Trump conducted, but now, as we heard from Marco Rubio, 2,000 prisoners released. There have been pastors who have been released. Venezuela says all American citizens have been released. What's your response now with the benefit of hindsight, and what would you have done as commander-in-chief? Look, there's a lot of dictators around the world that I don't like. Maduro is one of them. That doesn't mean that the U.S. should use force to overthrow them one by one. Anytime we're talking about using force, and I say this as somebody who was sent into a war on the orders of an American president, the bar has to be higher. It has to be in the core security interest of this country, and there has to be no alternative. And I just don't see any evidence of that in the case of Venezuela. And the rationale that the administration gave was that this was about drug trafficking. But if we're really serious about that, we have yet to hear an answer from the White House on why the President Trump, pardoned the president of Honduras, the ex-president who was convicted in an American courtroom of bringing in, I think, 400, I can't even remember how many millions of tons of cocaine, of billions of individual doses of cocaine into the United States. How did this criminal get a pardon from President Trump? Did he contribute to the Ballroom Project? Did he buy some of that cryptocurrency and make the Trump family wealthier? Why are these many fraudsters getting those pardons? And I think the pardon power, whether we're talking about the people who were convicted of beating up cops on January 6th, or whether we're talking about the ex-president of Honduras, should be a much bigger story in this country. Secretary Buttigieg, I would note that Marco Rubio gave an explanation this week. The president felt that the Honduran president, former I should note, was untreated fairly. But thank you for your viewpoint. We love having alternative viewpoints here and we'll be following you, and I know you've already answered. You won't share with us if you're running in 2028, which is why I did not ask. Let me break down what made this appearance effective, because the technique matters more than the personality. But he didn't wait for questions to frame the conversation. He brought his own agenda into the interview. He raised the Epstein files. He raised the historically low approval ratings. He raised the internal chaos within the administration, the conflicts between Trump and his own attorney general, his own Homeland Security Secretary, his own senior advisors. He didn't let the host set the terms of debate. He reset them. This is significant because most Democratic media appearances follow a predictable pattern. The host asks a hostile question, the Democrat tries to answer it fairly, the host interrupts with another hostile framing, the Democrat gets defensive, the audience sees weakness. But G reversed that dynamic. He was on offense from the first moment. He made the hosts respond to his framing rather than responding to theirs. Now let me show you why this matters strategically, because the timing is important. The administration is dealing with multiple simultaneous problems. Approval ratings have reached historically low levels. Internal conflicts are becoming public. Policy announcements are contradicting campaign promises. When a president promises to make things more affordable and then announces policies that would increase home prices for existing owners while costs rise everywhere else, that's a vulnerability. When pardons are being sold for what reports suggest is around $2 million each, and that same administration claims to represent law and order, that's a contradiction worth highlighting. When the White House is consumed by internal warfare between factions, that's chaos worth exposing. But TJ understood that you don't need complicated arguments when the simple facts are this damaging. You just need to state them clearly in places where the audience hasn't heard them. That's why Fox appearances matter, not to convince the hosts, to reach viewers who might not encounter this information elsewhere. Let me show you the broader strategic implication, because this connects to how Democrats should be thinking about the next 18 months. There's been a long-standing debate within Democratic politics about whether to chase moderate voters by moving toward the center or to energize the base with stronger progressive messaging. But that framing misses something important. The most effective political communication isn't about positioning on a left-right spectrum. It's about clarity, confidence, and willingness to name what's actually happening. Voters respond to politicians who seem to believe what they're saying, who don't hedge, who don't apologize for their positions, who make their case directly. But a GIE demonstrated that you can go into hostile territory and win the exchange, not by being moderate, but by being direct. The lesson isn't about ideology, it's about posture. Stop treating Fox hosts as legitimate interlocutors whose questions deserve respectful engagement. Treat them as representatives of an audience that deserves to hear information they're not getting. Stop trying to find common ground with bad faith arguments. Expose the bad faith directly. Stop playing defense on Republican-chosen terrain. Choose your own terrain and force them to respond. This approach requires something that Democratic politicians often lack: willingness to create uncomfortable moments, willingness to be seen as aggressive, willingness to mock arguments that deserve mockery, rather than treating them as serious positions requiring serious rebuttals. The administration's current unpopularity creates an opportunity, but opportunities don't convert themselves into electoral results. They require political actors willing to press the advantage. Now let me address what Democrats should actually be saying, because having the platform isn't enough without the message. The corruption is real and documented. Pardons are being distributed to donors. The ballroom project at the White House is consuming attention while ordinary Americans deal with rising costs. The gap between campaign promises and governing reality is widening daily, but exposing corruption isn't sufficient. Voters need to know what the alternative looks like. What's the Democratic vision for immigration that isn't just reactive to Republican framing? What's the economic message that speaks to people who feel left behind by both parties? What's the affirmative case for why Democratic governance produces better outcomes? The most effective political movements combine two things: clear opposition to what's wrong and compelling vision of what's possible. Right now, Democrats have abundant material for the first part. The administration is providing new examples daily, but the second part, the positive vision, remains underdeveloped in most Democratic messaging. Buttigieg's Fox appearance was effective at the opposition part. He named the failures, he highlighted the contradictions, he created moments where the hosts had no response, but the next step, translating that into votes, requires connecting that opposition to something voters can support, not just something they can oppose. This is where the 2026 strategy becomes critical. Every House seat is on the ballot, 1/3 of the Senate, governorships across the country. These elections will determine whether there's any institutional check on administration conduct for the next 2 years. The historically low approval ratings suggest vulnerability. The internal chaos suggests an administration that may not be able to execute effective campaign operations. The accumulating controversies suggest material for contrast, but none of that matters if Democrats don't show up in hostile media environments making the case directly, if they don't develop affirmative messages that give voters something to support, if they don't learn from what Buttigieg demonstrated about the effectiveness of confident direct engagement. The traditional Democratic instinct is caution. Don't say anything that could be clipped out of context. Don't create controversy. Don't give the other side ammunition. But in a media environment where the other side will manufacture ammunition regardless, caution produces only weakness. It signals that Democrats don't believe their own positions strongly enough to defend them aggressively. What Buttigieg showed is that the opposite approach works better. Go into hostile territory, state the facts directly, don't apologize for the implications. Let the host struggle to respond. That's not recklessness, that's confidence. And confidence is what voters are looking for in a moment when everything feels chaotic. Here's what to watch in the coming weeks. Watch which Democrats accept Fox invitations and which decline. The ones who show up and perform well will be building profiles for future leadership. The ones who avoid hostile media will be signaling something about their willingness to fight. Watch the messaging that emerges. Is it defensive and cautious or direct and confident? Does it focus only on what's wrong, or does it offer a vision of what's possible? Does it chase moderate positioning, or does it trust that clarity and conviction are more persuasive than ideological calibration? Watch the Republican response. When Democrats go on offense effectively, the typical response is to attack the messenger rather than address the substance. If you see increased personal attacks on Democrats who are landing punches, that's a signal the punches are landing. The political landscape right now favors Democrats in ways it hasn't for years. But favorable landscapes don't vote. People do, and people respond to politicians who seem like they're actually fighting for something. Buttigieg showed what that looks like for 9 minutes on Fox. The question is whether other Democrats learn from it. The administration's problems are going to continue accumulating. The corruption will continue being exposed. The internal chaos will continue spilling into public view. The gap between promises and reality will continue widening. Democrats can watch that happen and hope it translates into votes, or they can actively make the case in hostile environments with confidence and clarity, connecting the failures to an alternative vision. One approach is passive, the other is active. The next 18 months will reveal which approach the party chooses, and that choice will determine whether the opportunity created by administration failures converts into actual electoral results. Watch who shows up ready to fight. That will tell you who's serious about